After my husband gambled our economy, he gambled away our house trying to fix things. Then he came back to tell me it was for his family, who proposed we live in their house, but I refused to continue our marriage. When I first met him, everything seemed perfect. He was charismatic, charming, and confident, traits that drew me to him from the start. We quickly became inseparable, and our life together, or at least the image of it, was everything I'd ever hoped for. We built a future based on love, ambition, and shared dreams. But somewhere along the way, something changed, something I didn't see coming, something that would unravel everything we had worked so hard to build. The man I thought I knew transformed into someone almost unrecognizable, and the person who would become a stranger in my own home was my husband. At first, the signs were subtle, small shifts in his behavior, little hints of something off, his sudden obsession with financial opportunities that seemed too good to be true. It started innocently enough, with late-night talks about investments, high-risk ventures, and his desire to provide more for us. But as time went on, those opportunities began to take up more and more of his time, leaving me to handle everything on my own. The love we once shared began to feel like an afterthought. Our conversations centered less on our future and more on his big ideas, and the pressure started to mount. I wasn't prepared for what came next. Slowly, his obsession with gambling took root, initially in small, inconspicuous ways. The trips to the casino became more frequent. It wasn't just the typical slot machines or poker tables, it escalated into much more dangerous territory. High-stakes bets, risky investments, and borrowing money from places I didn't even know existed started becoming regular occurrences. At first, he reassured me. He told me everything was under control, that this was just a temporary phase, and that his plans would pay off. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't long before I realized the depth of his desperation. I began to notice bank statements with alarming numbers, credit cards maxed out, and loans taken out without my knowledge or consent. Our financial situation, once stable, began to crumble. I tried to ignore the growing unease in my stomach, clinging to the hope that everything would eventually be fine, that he would snap out of it, that things would go back to normal. But they didn't. One day, without warning, the truth hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. We were losing everything. The house we'd worked so hard to buy, the place that was supposed to be our sanctuary, was now at risk. His gambling debts had mounted to an insurmountable amount. He had risked everything. Our savings, our future, and now our home. The weight of it all was crushing, suffocating. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was my life, our life, spiraling out of control because of decisions I couldn't understand and that he couldn't stop. I confronted him, my voice trembling with anger, confusion, and pain. He was defensive as expected, blaming everything from bad luck to unfortunate timing. But what struck me the most was the utter lack of accountability. He didn't see it as his fault. In his mind, it was just part of the process, part of his grand plan to fix things and make everything better. But there was nothing that could justify what he had done. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of his actions. How had we gotten to this point? How had the man I loved so deeply become someone I didn't recognize? How could he put our entire future, our livelihood, at risk for the sake of some reckless gamble? And what was worse, he didn't seem to care. I was left standing there, devastated and lost, not knowing how to pick up the pieces. Our economy, everything we had worked for, was in shambles, and the house we had bought together, our dream home, was slipping through my fingers. I couldn't understand how he could think this was a solution. I couldn't grasp the logic of throwing away everything for a hope, a dream, that had no foundation in reality. The hardest part wasn't the financial loss. It wasn't the house or the things that could be replaced. It was the feeling of betrayal, the trust that had been shattered, the love that now felt so distant. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a profound failure, not just of judgment, but of everything I believed we were building together. At that moment, I knew things would never be the same. I had to make a choice. Would I keep trying to fix the unfixable, or was it time to walk away? But as I stood there, staring at the wreckage of what had been my life, One question kept echoing in my mind. How could he not see the damage he'd caused? In the weeks that followed, the weight of the reality I was facing only seemed to grow heavier. The more I tried to push through, to find some semblance of normality, the more the truth about my husband's actions consumed me. It was no longer just about the house or the money. It was about who we were now, who he had become. I looked at him and wondered if I even knew him anymore. The man I had once loved and trusted seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone desperate, someone unwilling to face the consequences of his choices. And yet, he still seemed to believe that everything would work out. He told me that all of this, his gambling, his reckless decisions, was for us. For me. For our future. He kept saying that his investments, his big plans, would eventually pay off. Just wait a little longer, he would say, his eyes pleading, his tone more desperate than ever. I'm doing this for us, for our family. I couldn't understand how he could be so delusional. Our home was on the line. Our entire financial stability was gone. And yet he thought a few more gambles, a few more risky bets, could somehow fix it all. He was chasing a mirage, unable to see that the closer he got, the farther away he pushed everything we had left. The day we received the notice about the foreclosure was the day everything truly hit rock bottom. We were on the brink of losing everything, and yet he didn't seem to grasp the gravity of the situation. As I read the letter, my hands trembling, he was in the other room, plotting his next move. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him and make him see how close we were to the edge. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, watching as the reality of the situation sank in. He walked into the room moments later, looking almost relieved. I've got it, he said, with an air of certainty. I've found a way out. I looked at him, my heart pounding. A way out? How? What are you talking about? He smiled, almost too confidently. I've made a deal. I'm borrowing money from a source that can help us get back on track. It'll cover everything, pay off the debts, save the house. We'll be fine. I could barely believe what I was hearing. The man who had already gambled away everything, now borrowing more money, potentially from dangerous sources, thinking it was a solution. It was insanity. The weight of his decisions crushed me. My entire body felt like it was drowning under the pressure, under the absurdity of his belief that more risk was the answer. You can't keep doing this, I told him, my voice quiet but firm. You can't gamble everything away again. We can't just keep borrowing and hoping something will turn around. But he wasn't listening. He was too far gone in his obsession with fixing things his way. And then came the ultimatum that would change everything. I've made the deal, he said, his voice steady. But there's one thing we need to do. I'm not sure how long it'll take to fix this. We might need to move out for a while. You can stay with me, or we can figure something out. But I need time, and I need space. For this to work. The words hung in the air like a noose. Time, space. What was he asking? I couldn't understand. It was as if he was asking me to put everything on hold while he fixed the mess he had made, with no real plan in place and no guarantees. The audacity of it was staggering. I'll be back, he added, as though it were as simple as leaving for a few days. But we need to start thinking about our options. Things will be different once we have the money. You'll see. And just like that, he walked out of our house. The house that had once been our dream. The house that was now a symbol of everything he had destroyed. Chapter 3. A family's offer, a marriage's end. Refusing to live under their roof, days turned into weeks, and the silence between us grew unbearable. He would call occasionally, his voice a hollow attempt at reassurance, but it did nothing to ease the gnawing anxiety that consumed me. Each day felt like a battle, but there was no enemy, only the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. I had spent so long trying to hold things together, trying to believe in the man I married, but now I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was his family. His parents. We know what's going on, his mother said, her voice full of concern. We're here for you. We think it might be best for all of you to come stay with us. You and him. We'll help you get back on your feet. I listened in stunned silence as she spoke, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. They were offering us a place to stay, offering me a place to stay, while my husband worked to fix things. But what was left to fix? Our home was gone, our future was uncertain, and all he had was a desperate hope that this risky venture would somehow come through. His family, however, saw it differently. They had always been more forgiving of his faults, willing to overlook his shortcomings because, in their eyes, he was their son. And like him, they believed that this was just a bump in the road, that all of this could be solved if we just had the right support. They couldn't see the wreckage he had caused, nor the irreparable damage to the trust and love between us. But I could see it. And I was done. "I can't do this," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and finality. "I can't go live with them. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. And I can't keep living this lie of a marriage. He's gone too far. I'm done." His family's offer, as generous as it seemed, felt like a final straw. It wasn't just a roof over our heads, it was a reminder of everything I had lost, everything I was no longer willing to tolerate. They saw it as an opportunity to fix us, but I realized that nothing could fix what had been broken between us. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, feeling the weight of my decision. I had spent so long trying to salvage our marriage, trying to believe in him. But now I knew that some things couldn't be fixed. Some things couldn't be saved. And my marriage was one of them. I didn't expect the final conversation to be so definitive. After everything that had happened, I thought there would be more to say, more to argue about, but in the end, it was clear. Nothing had changed. My husband still believed his plan would work out. He still thought that somehow this gamble would turn around and save us, save him. But I had already seen enough. I remember the night he came back, his face a mix of exhaustion and forced optimism. He stood at the door, like he was about to ask for forgiveness, or maybe for one more chance. I knew the words that were coming before he even said them. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice shaky, "but you have to understand. This is for us. For our future. Everything will be fine once this works out. I need you to believe in me." But I didn't believe him anymore. I couldn't. The damage wasn't just financial, it was deeper, more permanent. It was in the cracks of trust that had shattered, in the promises he'd broken, in the house we'd lost and the life I no longer recognized. He was asking for my faith, but he'd already proven that he couldn't keep his promises. The man who once held my future in his hands had turned it into dust. "I can't," I said quietly, my heart heavy but resolute. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't wait for a future that may never come. I've lost too much, and I've given too much of myself. I don't know who you are anymore." His face fell, and for a moment, I almost thought I saw the man I had once loved. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and it wasn't just about the house or the money anymore. It was about everything he had taken from me, the trust, the peace, the love we had shared. He looked at me, and I saw the familiar desperation in his eyes, the same look that had driven him to make reckless decision after reckless decision. But this time, it didn't sway me. This time, I didn't want to hear it anymore. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice rising, though his words felt empty. "You're throwing away everything. I'm doing this for us." But I knew that he wasn't doing this for us. He was doing this for his own hope, for his own desperate need to make things right, without ever facing what he had truly broken. He wasn't willing to take responsibility, and I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who refused to see the truth. The silence between us was deafening, thick with all the things we didn't say. I stood up, my mind made up, my heart pounding with the finality of my decision. "I'm not staying here anymore," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done." He didn't argue, and for a moment, I thought he understood. But I could see it in his eyes, he didn't get it. He still thought that this was just a temporary setback, that somehow we would patch things together. But I had nothing left to give. Not to him, not to a marriage that had been reduced to nothing more than a series of broken promises and empty hopes. I walked out of that house, our house, leaving everything behind. The life we had built, the life that had once felt like a dream, was now just a memory. His family's offer to take us in didn't matter anymore. I couldn't live under their roof, trying to make sense of a marriage that was no longer mine. And so I left. With nothing but the certainty that I had to start over, that I had to find myself again. For so long, I had been holding on to a future that didn't exist. But now, I was ready to walk away, to rebuild my life without the weight of someone else's mistakes hanging over me. Maybe one day he would realize what he had lost. Maybe one day he would finally understand. But I couldn't wait around for that day. I couldn't keep living in the ruins of a life that no longer had a foundation. I had to move on. For me. For my future. And so, I did.